Good morning, everyone. Thank you also, Mayor Booker, for being with us today. Thank you, Reverend, for that incredible opening prayer. I want to take a minute and just before I get started, have everyone close their eyes just for a minute with me. And as you close your eyes, I want you to imagine a reality of American life in which gun violence does not exist. Think about what that feels like. Think about how you feel when you drop your kids at school. Think about how it feels to walk down your street, to sit in your house and understand that when you go to the movies or a concert or a mosque or your synagogue or your church, you will be free from gun violence. How does that feel to you? Does that feel like an America that's living up to the idea of being the home of the free and the land of the brave? Does it feel like an America where you have the right to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Now open your eyes. That's the America I know every single one of us believe is in fact our birthright, regardless of race, age, gender, national origin, or any other category. Yeah, I'm in this fight because that's not the America we have today. And the reason I'm here is because I lived in a country that provided that to me. It makes me sad it wasn't my country of birth. It was Switzerland, where just like America, per capita, Switzerland's just behind us, but they have about as many guns as people too. They have a militia that has guns, and they are issued guns. But safe storage is absolutely required of those weapons. And you can be inspected as to whether or not those firearms are safely stored. And so when I lived in Switzerland with my family, I had what I call now with lots of people, a happiness and safety quotient. That was my life there because I never worried what would happen to my daughters. And you know what happened? I let them go out and freely play, walk around their neighborhoods, be with their friends. And they were happier for it too. And it is something that we as Americans in this fight, when you talk to people who say, why are you in this fight? I want you to think about that and think about the reality that every day, whether you are a victim of gun violence, and I know many of you here have been or have lost loved ones to gun violence. And I'm so sorry that that is the case. It makes me angry that that's the case. We all must do better. And the reason why is because I believe, and I think all of us as Americans believe, we have the fundamental right to live without the fear of being shot. And for too many Americans, that is simply not a reality. How many of you today find yourselves scanning a theater or a restaurant for the closest emergency exits? I know I do. Who has a child in school? Who has experienced an active shooter drill? Who has been afraid walking down their street in their very own community? Makes me sad to say that students across this country and children in too many neighborhoods are experiencing PTSD as a result of the reality of gun violence. And so I'm here, and so many of you as advocates that I see here with us today are here to try to make a difference. And I'm going to outline some of the things that I think we can do together collectively as a movement to prevent gun violence, to make a big difference on this issue. I want to say first, and I would be remiss in not mentioning, that the timing of this summit, of course, with 3 Nashville lawmakers who were protesting the horrific shooting at Covenant School, being expelled effectively from the legislature in Tennessee, just on the heels of this horrific school shooting at the Covenant School in Nashville. That marked the 377th school shooting since Columbine in 1999. Yet, too many of our leaders do nothing. Not about that gun violence, and too often we have, and I know many of you in this area experience everyday gun violence. And the anger that I sense when I talk to you is that never makes the headlines. And it doesn't take away from the fact that we all feel terrible, awful, when we have these headline gripping atrocities. But we all need to understand the full complexity of what is now a public health epidemic and the #1 cause of death for children in America. That means what we have is indeed a public health epidemic, and we have to treat it as such. And we can and we should make a difference around this issue, because in the next 3 years, based on studies that we've seen, it is likely that nearly every American will know someone impacted by gun violence. That's a uniquely American epidemic, and we have to treat it as such. But first, let me set the stage a bit. How did we get here? Because understanding the roots of the epidemic are vitally critical in determining solutions. When President Reagan and his press secretary, Jim Brady, our namesake at Brady, were shot, gun violence had been on the rise all across America. And the introduction of firearms such as the Saturday Night Special used in that assassination attempt made it easy for individuals intent on doing harm to obtain weapons inexpensively. The passage and signing of the bipartisan, let me focus on this, bipartisan Brady Law in 1993 passed, I will say, by unanimous consent in the United States Senate. That means not a single member of the US Senate voted against it. And I know that seems hard to imagine now, but honestly, for me and many of us at Brady, it's also a beacon of hope. So let's stay focused on that while I take us through some of the hard facts here. The passage of that law, and just the next year, the passage of the federal assault weapons ban, marked a major shift in what we thought was the momentum around our issue. And it made a difference. Since the implementation of the Brady background check system, now over 25 years ago, more than 4.4 million sales and transfers of guns have been stopped to prohibited purchasers that we all agree should not have easy access to firearms. In fact, that agreement, just so you know, was made in 1968. It was made in 1968 because we lost incredible leaders like Martin Luther King to gun violence. And so that change set up those categories. And that was very important. I say that it should have marked a new day, the passage of these laws for gun violence prevention, but it also galvanized a new direction for the National Rifle Association, led at the time and still by Wayne LaPierre. In fact, we saw evidence of that even in the final passage of the assault weapons ban. A hastily scrambled last-minute insertion into that package. Literally, I've talked to the United States senators who were on the floor when this happened, inserted what is called a sunset clause. Sunset clause. And just so you know, this is very atypical. Almost no laws have these kinds of sunset clauses. What that said is the law is in effect for a decade only. and then it automatically expires. That's what happened. And in that time, since 2010 alone, the NRA began contributions in record number to political candidates across this country with one aim in mind: stop any progress around gun safety in this country. Full stop, 100%, that is the focus. The NRA has contributed over $150 million to the campaign coffers of politicians, and in 2016 contributed over $50 million to one single candidate, former President Donald Trump. These direct contributions to candidates by the NRA are dwarfed by their super PACs, contributions that are virtually impossible to trace based on current campaign finance law that fund independent expenditures against gun safety candidates and for pro-gun candidates. And make no mistake, guys, this has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. As Justice Warren Berger said in commenting on the court's decision in Heller, which for the first time since our founding found an individual right to carry firearms. That's not the heritage or origin of the Second Amendment, which is actually about a well-regulated militia. What Warren Berger said about Heller, and would certainly, if he were with us, say about its progeny, McDonald and then Bruin, the most recent case by the Supreme Court, is it's the greatest fraud perpetrated on the court ever in history. And that's what we're up against. But you know, I come from a long line of Irishmen, and we like David versus Goliath. So we have to keep fighting, because we do have a situation where we were, until recently, with the advent of many more in this movement, including obviously Everytown and Moms. I see moms here today, Gifford, and a host of other organizations, including a new one, March 4th, with Kitty here, who are doing their best to make a difference around this issue. And that's important, because what we need is a real change. So you'll recall when I began earlier, I referenced that we are gathered to provide guidance as to how we can bring about that real change. It's three main categories, and this isn't just us at Brady, right? This is what each of you can think about that you're working on when I think about the movement for gun violence. The first is legislation, and that's obviously legislation at the federal and state level. It's really important that we focus on both, because when we can't win at the federal level, the incubation that is happening in states like Illinois, 3 cheers for Illinois, is so important. It's critically important, because we need accountability of the gun industry, and we can get that bit by bit by bit. I want a federal approach, but we can get it through ensuring that we have state accountability and demonstrate and show that stronger gun laws save lives, and they do. Gun industry accountability is also just about something super basic. It's about the enforcement of the laws we help pass. And one of the greatest successes that we have achieved as a movement in the last year is the appointment of Steve Dettelbach to lead the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. This is huge progress. You know, the ATF lacked a permanent director for over a decade. And every ATF director prior to Steve Dettelbach was literally captive to the gun industry. You'll recall that when we had a President Trump, there were memos leaked from the acting director to the National Rifle Association asking for red lines of his strategy to make sure they were fully satisfied with it. That's not happening today. Instead, we have someone who embraces the role of the ATF, which is the federal licensee for every gun dealer across this country. And by the way, we have more gun dealers in this country than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. And you all in Chicago and Illinois are living with the consequences of a unified effort to cripple the ATF from enforcing the law. Because about 5% of gun dealers, 5% of that huge panoply of gun dealers are responsible for the sale of 90% of crime guns. And you know what? We have a director of ATF now who gets that. So when I talk about accountability, that's so important, because who are on the front lines in our country of enforcing, for example, the Brady Law? Gun dealers. They're the ones who determine whether or not a background check gets done. And you know what? If they look the other way, or they're trying to fund traffickers, then that whole system falls down. And that's why enforcement is so important. And that's why everyone here should be laser focused on that. The last is cultural change. Look, I don't delight in saying so many negative things about an organization that was founded in the 1800s, like the National Rifle Association, because if it was consistent with its founding, I would have no problem with it. I would want it to be a partner. In fact, despite me hitting my head against the wall, I've asked to sit down with Wayne LaPierre to talk about how we can partner. I've gone to his headquarters many times. I can't find him there. Apparently, he works out of the Ben and Jerry's down the street. That's true. But if the National Rifle Association had been consistent with its founding, we wouldn't have to think about cultural change. But what they've done, and the Sandy Hook case laid this bare, obviously brought on behalf of some of the parents who lost their children in Sandy Hook. That case was about the marketing of firearms. That case was about things like get your man card here, advertisements selling our children assault style weapons on purpose. If we want to change the culture in our country, though, we have to focus on reimagining what is the origin of firearms in the first place in this country, which really has everything to do with responsible gun ownership. And we need many more gun owners in this country to lift their voices about what that means. And I hope that we can. Getting myself all worked up, I always do this. Let me get back on track here. I'm going to get in trouble. So as advocates, you can also work for better laws, and you have, many of you have, and thank you for that. We know, and I just want to talk about this, that the laws that states pass actually make a big difference, you know, and I often hear, oh, it doesn't matter, gun laws don't work. That is simply not true. In fact, you in Chicago probably hear this all the time. And I just want to say that is the biggest and easiest lie to turn over when you hear it. The reason you are experiencing often so much more gun violence is because you border states like Indiana that have the weakest laws in the entire country. So if you were trying to get easy access to a firearm, where do you think you'd go? Right across the border. That's what happens. We have the data. We understand that that's what happens. And it is infuriating because stronger laws make a difference. They do. Handgun purchaser licensing laws, that's expanding the Brady Law in states that have not expanded it. And what I mean by that is 1 in 5 guns sold today is sold with no background check at all. Why is that? Because when Jim and Sarah were lobbying for the Brady Law more than a quarter century ago, there was no internet, didn't exist, and there were no huge big business gun shows. They've proliferated all over the country. And as a result, in states not like Illinois, because you have expanded the Brady Law, But in states like Indiana that haven't done that, you can go on a website and attempt to purchase a firearm. And I do this when I'm traveling sometimes just to see how it works. It's pretty horrific because what happens is you put in your zip code, you say AR style weapon into this site, and it will bring up a host of weapons that you can purchase, no questions asked, cash, within usually a few miles of where you live. That's the loophole we're talking about that we want Congress to fix. It's pretty simple. The bill is about 25 pages long. So we need to fix that. And comprehensive licensing. That's so important. What we mean by that are permitting systems. That goes back again to responsible gun ownership. You know, we've done polling recently about how veterans feel about these laws. They are hugely supportive. Their view is, why should we have gone through all of this training and recurrent training around firearms only to go into combat and then come back into a country where our kids could get shot in Target? No one wants to live that way. So just keep this in mind. These laws work, and we have studies to show that they do. So did the assault weapons ban. And I know that most of you already know this, so I'm not going to dwell on this, but mass shootings with assault weapons after the assault weapons bans had lapsed rose tremendously. So the law actually works. And that's very important to keep in mind. There's a lot of graphics and information about this that we can provide in case you have questions or issues about this. But that federal ban meant a substantial decrease in the use of assault-style weapons during the period of the ban. And since then, as well, mass shootings with multiple firearm purchases have risen tremendously. Why is that important to know? Because we have been working with a number of other groups for years and years and years to pass what's called a merchant category code, MCC as it's called. And that merchant category code would require credit card issuers to have a flag on purchases where there are multiple purchases within a short period of time of firearms and related kinds of accessories. Why would we want that? Because history shows us what we're seeing is if we can find ways to intervene, we have data ahead of time showing mass purchases of assault-style weapons, not just one or two, and not even at one or two stores, over multiple periods of days in a short time. And if you read the information about the shooter in Nashville, that's exactly what they did as well. So that's why that's so important and can make such a difference. The MCC could have alerted authorities to the purchase of the 47 guns amassed by the shooter in the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival. This weapons cache allowed him to fire more than 1,000 rounds in less than 11 minutes. It could have also alerted authorities to the purchase of 7 weapons, as I said, in the most recent shooting in Nashville at the Covenant School. Despite Brady's consistent efforts, in March of this year, Visa and MasterCard announced they were pausing implementation of these merchant category codes for firearm vendors, following heavy outcry from the gun industry. Where is the heavy outcry from those of us whose lives are being impacted? And I've heard from a number of banks, including Amalgamated Bank. Please know that name. Their CEO, Priscilla, led the efforts in the entire financial services sector to get that merchant category code. She has 2 full-time security guards now because of threats made to her by the gun industry. She needs to hear from us that we thank her, and we need to push these credit card issuers to go forward with what they already agreed to do. Their pause is inconsistent with what the standard-making body that they voted to support says that they need to do. Yes, of course. Priscilla, she's become a friend. I'll have to tell you her last name. I can't remember it, but she is the CEO and president of Amalgamated Bank. That's the financial institution that led the creation of the MCC code for these purposes. And by the way, guys, the MCC code is used for all kinds of categories of other things. This isn't new. This is not unique. In the wake of the back-to-back tragedies in Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas, Congress finally united in a bipartisan effort to curb our escalating rate of gun violence, which increased by 33% between 2011 and 2020. This was the first significant piece of national legislation addressing gun violence to pass in 30 years. And it's the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was signed into law by President Biden on June 25th of 2022. And now the DOJ is working to ensure that states and territories with extreme risk laws, like Illinois, and which want to focus on education about safe storage, have funds. And I think it's really important for those of you, including Mayor Booker here and others who are elected officials, understand the promise that this funding provides. This law includes $4.5 billion for state grant programs that will help reduce gun violence and expand access to community and school-based behavioral health services for children and families. Just what you were talking about, Mayor Booker. This includes $1.5 billion in appropriations for the public safety provisions, of which $750 million will go through the already authorized Burn Justice Assistance Program. Additionally, significant funding will go towards mental health provisions to implement such programs as the 988 National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline that provides 24/7 free confidential support, and $1 billion for the Safe and Healthy Students programs in Title 4A of the Elementary Secondary Education Act. Another important legislative effort at the state level is, of course, around the implementation of extreme risk protection orders, also known as red flag laws. In Illinois, I believe they're called firearm restraining orders. These laws typically do empower families, household members, and law enforcement agencies to petition courts for a civil order to temporarily suspend a person's access to firearms. In most instances, they also prohibit the individual from purchasing another firearm while the ERPO remains in effect, a critical necessity, as you can certainly imagine. Illinois can be proud of being one of the 19 states and the District of Columbia to have such a law on the books, but these laws are only as effective as their implementation. If those in our community who are on the front lines of seeing the need for these laws aren't aware of them, then we lose lives as a result. So we could not be more thrilled at Brady to be able to help educate everyone in our community about these laws and really try to work with communities across this country to expand training to folks in the medical community, to law enforcement officers, to educators about these laws. Here's a real life example of what can happen when a state doesn't have an ERPO. I'll give you two. I'm certain many of you saw the recent AP story about a shooter who opened fire in an Omaha Target in January of this year. For the past 3 years, the shooter had been in and out of various mental health facilities and diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was also a gun owner, and his family would confiscate his weapons as he repeatedly tried to find ways to end his life. Eventually, he took a Glock, went into a Target, and he began firing. He was shot. He did not shoot or injure or kill anyone else, but he was shot and killed by police arriving upon the scene. The issue there, of course, is that with an extreme risk protection order, that reality could have looked very, very different. Nebraska doesn't have one. And if you read the AP interviews of the family members, it's heartbreaking because they did everything that they could to try to remove guns, firearms from this individual, but there was nothing in public policy that supported those efforts. If it sounds familiar, that's because you've been reading about the shooter in Nashville, because the parents there also indicated that they did not believe that their child should have guns. But Tennessee has no extreme risk protection law either to help families completely and fully remove all firearms from individuals. That is a real failure, and we need to fix that. We need to get more states to adopt these kinds of laws all across the country, and we all need to work, especially you who are here in Illinois, to make sure that in every corner of your state, those on the front lines of seeing a risk with someone who's at risk to themselves or others understands the availability of these orders to protect lives. In the interest of time, I'm going to move forward here. And states are continuing to make a difference here. I just want to point out one of my great heroes in this movement, Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey. There's a whole panoply of things that can be done. And while Illinois has done a lot, I want to indicate additional actions that can be taken because there's always more. Look at a state like California, which has really led the way around these kinds of issues. Phil Murphy looked at the state of New Jersey to find out what can I do to improve enforcement in my state of the laws that we already have on the books. And one thing that he noted was I can ask questions of dealers of firearms who are attempting to sell firearms in the state of New Jersey. And I can ask them, how are you training your employees? How are you ensuring that every gun sale is safe? What are you doing and how are you doing it? And if you don't provide answers that are satisfactory to me, I don't need you to sell guns in my state. So there's a lot of creative solutions that augment the authority that folks like Steve Dettelbach at the ATF have. And we need to figure out how to do that better. Steve Dettelbach can only do so much at the federal level. We need more support at the state and local level to support those efforts. My last point here, because I want to leave time for questions, is I talked about cultural norm change, and I want to drive this point home. We have a long history of cultural norm change campaigns in this country. I know I'm a creature of that. I'll age myself. I used to love watching the Brady Bunch. And I remember a series of episodes where Jan and Marcia, maybe, and Greg, hectored their parents relentlessly. Why aren't you wearing a seatbelt? We have to wear seatbelts. Why aren't you wearing seatbelts? I did not know at the time that entire dialogue was the result of a huge campaign by NHTSA and other nonprofit organizations to create culture change to get the parents who were not wearing seatbelts. The kids were, but these parents who were driving grew up not wearing seatbelts and didn't want to wear seatbelts. All of us kids in America started really hectoring our parents. And as a result, the use of seatbelts by those adults materially increased. And guess what happened? Traffic fatalities and traffic injuries began to plummet. That's the difference that these kinds of ad campaigns and cultural norm change campaigns can have. And we need that for our movement too. So we know the statistics here, gun violence by the numbers. Every day, 321 people are shot, 111 people are killed. Every year, 117,000 people are shot, over 40,000 now are killed. And the breakdown of this, 37% of homicide, roughly, these are numbers based on 5-year averages. So we'll have seen increases in some. 3% other, 60%, now more like 65, are suicide. When we think about all of the solutions to gun violence, all of these aspects of gun violence have to be included. None is exempt. And so Brady has a campaign that's very, very simple. Ask, is there an unlocked gun in your home? It's a simple question, but it has the power to save a life. It's related to the national advertising campaign that we have called End Family Fire. What is family fire? Family fire is the injury or death of a loved one with a gun in the home. In 2018, we launched our End Family Fire campaign. It now has over 1 billion views all across this country. It's an ad campaign that has print, TV, digital, radio. And what we're doing is targeting gun-owning households, really to reinvigorate the idea of what responsible gun storage means, but also what it means and what happens to your family and our entire society when that doesn't happen. For those who see the campaign and are ad aware, they do 2 things. They talk to their loved ones about safe storage, and they engage in safe storage. This is saving lives, but we need help getting this in every community across this country. I just want to share with you briefly our recent ad that brings together why safe gun storage is so related to so much gun violence that we're seeing today.
I know my gun should be stored locked and unloaded. But what good is a gun if it's not prepared for use? So instead, I'm prepared for misuse. I'm prepared to stop arterial bleeding in 3 minutes. Less for kids, they bleed out faster. My son just shot himself. Hurry. Access to firearms triples your risk of death by suicide. But that's not the only way to misuse a gun.
I think I heard Mama.
Misuse can happen when you least expect. So being prepared means knowing the difference between CPR for adults and kids. Unintentional shootings happen every day.
There's been another deadly shooting in a local elementary school.
So that sense of safety my guns bring me
The gun he acquired from the family member's home.
can shatter in an instant.
The developing story will bring you more updates as they happen.
Store your gun securely, locked, unloaded, and away from ammo.
I should have said that's a little hard to watch. Sorry about that. I obviously saw this in production, and we were working with the Ad Council, just an incredible partner to us. They brought in more than 40 million in pro bono support for this campaign. We couldn't do it without them, or all of the advertisers across this country who provide free creative to launch these ads. We have over 110 ads since the inception that we have created and produced. But I will tell you, my reaction with the creative team when I saw this ad was I wanted to vomit. But that's what we need people to feel. We need people to understand why this is so important. And I want to say also thank you. I think we may or may not have with us today, let me find my notes, Vina Hamill. Vina is an MD candidate at Loyola's Stritch School of Medicine. And our team, our VP of Policy, Christian Heine, and our head of End Family Fire, Colleen, were at a conference and heard Vina give some of her research about why education of the medical community to talk to patients about the presence of a gun in the home is so important. Her study is being published and shows that makes a big difference. For those of you who are medical students or medical professionals, please keep that in mind. It's so critical that you can be on the front lines of doing this. Anyway, Colleen and Christian were at that conference, and Vina showed our End Family Fire collateral, which was wonderful. And we want it to be used as liberally as possible. It can make a big difference. Here you see this, what we call End Family Fire out in the world, at stadiums, on billboards, on bus shelters, and I think our team put that at a bar somewhere or saw it somewhere, but that can make a big difference. I also want to note we have a podcast and it's called Red, Blue, and Brady. We're very, very proud of this. Many of you who are in this fight every single day, I think probably some of you here have already been on it, but it really tries to provide a deep dive and layering approach to the issue of gun violence prevention. Finally, I just want to say thank you for all of you for everything that you're doing every single day to make a difference on this issue. I started by asking you to close your eyes and imagine an America in which we can all feel safe. I wouldn't still be doing this after all of these years if I didn't think we were capable of doing that. The thing that gives me hope is how many folks we have gaining momentum around this. We certainly have justice on our side, but it is literally on every one of us. And I would ask you to think about your spheres of influence and understand what I said before. Yes, state and federal action are so important, but so is enforcement and so is cultural norm change. That is the only way, those three activities together, we have ever solved any public health crisis. And that's what gun violence very sadly is. But we can make a difference and we can deliver that new kind of America. Thank you.